Okay, great. Now everybody has written something, and I will just show you my solution, and then we can talk about how we can run those tests. Okay. So this is one possible solution. You have here the function implementation down here, and then you have the documentation comment, which has some description and has some actual tests in it. And those tests are started with a triple. Yes.
I can see the code. Does anybody else see the code?
I see a red dot and a lot of green.
Yeah, same for me.
You can't see the code.
No,
it says def sum and then your sum function basically, but there's nothing else. There's some artifacts at the top.
Okay, now
is it better now?
That's better.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Also, for everybody that only sees part of the screen, right? If you resize Firefox's window, at least for me it works, then it actually resizes less screen. But whenever he sets it up new, it's basically like 4 times the size of my screen because he has HD screen.
Okay. Okay, so we have this function, and then we have the implementation of the function. And what's relevant here is that we have a comment in which we document the function, and at the same time we put in some examples. And in those examples we already predict the output. So a doc test will be able to tell us, are our examples correct?
Yes. So at this point, I want to add one small thing for everybody that now feels bad because his function does not return 0 when you don't provide any arguments. I just checked with the built-in Python function, and the built-in sum also fails if you don't give it any arguments.
Yes.
So don't feel bad.
Indeed. This was just something I decided I wanted my function to have, and thus I added an explicit test for it, right? So we have seen some of the solutions. So if we look at those solutions, I think all of you only wrote those examples. And what's very, very relevant about doc testing is that any documentation test must have a purpose as a piece of documentation. So you have those things, those tests here as examples with explanations. So they will be actually useful to the user. He sees the example and will be able to understand the function better. The primary function of a doc test is still documenting and not testing. And this is one very, very important thing to understand, in my opinion. So when you write doc tests, make sure they have a purpose as documentation. And you can also have duplicate tests if you have the same example twice, because it makes sense in some manner, right? I don't know, one time with strings and one time with integers or whatever. Just put examples there that make sense. And the nice thing about doc testing is that when you have your test suite set up correctly, doc test will essentially tell you when your documentation is out of date, and at the same time you can possibly write less unit tests because you already have doc tests for this particular bit. Also, one important note, you always need 3 of those larger or equal signs before the actual statements. I think in one of the solutions we only have 2. Alright? Okay. Yeah. So how do we actually run this? Does anybody already know how we can run this or have an idea? Nobody? Oh, come on, you know better. But okay, let me continue. So what we can do is we run python-m doctests on our file, and we can supply the -v argument to see what's happening there. So let's try that out. I need to change my shared screen again. I'm sorry if that causes any inconvenience. So we have the sum function here in the file, and what we can now do is python-m doctest sum.py, and we get no output at all. So let's see what happens with the --verbose argument. And verbose is just verbose for -v, right? So we see that doctest actually tries out this statement. It expects 6.5 here, and that's okay. So the test passes. All right. So try it out. And for this, you don't need this doctest test mod thing, right? So the doctest test mod thing is just if you want the doctest to run if you run the Python file. Because then essentially the doctest is being run on import, right?
Okay.
And this python-m thing is what you usually want to do. Okay, so let's go on. We have seen what doctests are in a basic way. We have written one and we have run one. Okay. So what's the catch? We can write documentation and tests at the same time. Why don't we write all our tests in this way? Do you have any ideas?
Some tests are much more complicated
Yes.
than a simple Python line.
Exactly.
That would be a possible reason.
We might have to interact with other modules, for example. So maybe we can't do that with this.
What do you mean interact with other modules? Like import a module?
Yeah.
You can just import a module in the doctest.
Well, if you say that doc tests are mainly for documentation purposes, we have some conflict of interest because, well, that's mostly not the purpose of our other tests. So you would try to do two things in one, which is probably messy.
Yes.
I guess another reason could be that we have a lot of setup to do before the tests, and this might decrease the readability of the code later when we have too many lines that precede the actual test.
So you have no setup or tear down mechanism as you have in unit tests.
But unit tests do only one thing, but doc tests are primarily have two purposes: to test as well as have a kind of documentation thing. So
right. Nice. So
yes,
we have three main catches. One is we don't have a setup or tear down mechanism. And our doc tests cannot really get long and complicated, right? And then we have a third thing. So if we look at our doc test, we see that we always have predictable output. We always have to know the output of the command, right? So what happens if we have an output like a generator object at some random address? So you can't really check that, right? And at least for this one particular bit, I want to make a counter example. So let's write a counter. We have a counter, which is a generator. and it yields new numbers every time, right? And it doesn't stop yielding, it yields them forever. So it is a generator, and we can't check if its list is correct or something. We have to check if it is a generator. So in those cases, or in general, if we have output that is not fully predictable, or that is not exactly like we can write it down, because we are in a documentation comment, we have certain restrictions, like we don't want our line to be longer than 80 characters, and at the same time our tested thing may return something really, really long, but it's still something useful for a documentation comment. So doctest has some line, some pragma kind of line you can put here. So can you see that? You can put the doctest column.
Nope.
Why can't you see that? Okay. Can you see it now?
Yeah, at least I'm seeing a green thing instead of your terminal. Yeah, that looks better.
You should have seen it since minutes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask whether you actually wanted to show us the counter, but then it was pretty clear even without it, but...
Okay, so this is the counter, or the counter
Yes.
example. And this is the counter with a doctest that actually works. So, can you read the stuff that's there?
Yep.
Okay, good. So, we have this directive. It's a so-called directive plus ellipsis, which allows us to use the ellipsis for any unpredictable output. Alright? So, whenever we have some problem like spacing or unpredictable output, we can go to the doctest documentation and look up if there is a directive for it. So in reality, I'm sharing my terminal screen now. So can you all see that?
Yep.
No.
Okay, great.
No.
No?
Yeah.
I can see it.
Me too.
Who cannot see it? My terminal.
Well, I'm still seeing the green counter thing, right? And not the terminal.
Oh my god. Can you refresh your page or something? Because the others seem to see their...
Resizing the screen doesn't work this time, and reloading the page.
And there you reload the page. So?
Well, I guess I survived it.
Do you
And
see a
actually,
terminal?
I'm seeing the terminal now, yeah, but I had to,
great.
like, do everything new.
So we can run this example just like the last one, and although counter returns a generator object at some random address, we can run this test. There is a similar way to do things. I'm going back to the slides now. I hope everybody gets it. So do you see a green slide now?
Yeah, just the screen size
Yeah.
was messed up again.
Okay. So where was I? We have this opportunity to run doctests with unpredictable output. And at the same time, we can also implicitly use the ellipsis for example, exception tracebacks and something like this. This is actually very, very easy, and for that I would simply direct you to the documentation. So checking for exceptions is totally easy. You just have to write like here's the traceback and then ... and then the exception message and so on. So this is really, really simple. And actually this is all there is to it for using doctests. And I would like to speak about what makes a very good doc test, because what is most important about doc test is using it appropriately and not using it for everything in terms of getting full test coverage with doc tests. That is something you probably don't want to do. So, what do you think makes a good doc test?
It should be concise and it should state the purpose of the function clearly.
Okay, so short and concise. Anything else?
I think it should accompany some kind of. I mean, what I want to say is that you want to write the documentation and then have the test underneath it, just so you can exemplify what you want to explain in the documentation.
Okay, so you're saying it should be accompanied by some explanation and not
Yeah,
being
exactly.
a standalone code snippet.
Yeah, exactly that.
Nice. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So, I think personally it can be reduced to one single point, and that is it must serve the documentation. It was kind of in the discussion in those 2 points you mentioned. They are important as well, being short, being concise, and having some elaboration. But in the end, I think it goes down to it having to serve the documentation. Yes. So, how can we run doc tests if we have a big project? And for this, I would like to show, for example, how you can do it with PyTest, which is one simple command, which is py.test -- doctest modules. Let me show you. I will be switching the screen again, I'm sorry. This is the last example. You should all be seeing a terminal now. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So we can just simply run py.test -- doctest module, and we will see that PyTest found our two files, the counter and the sum, and tested those. So if we would have an issue in here, then we would see that there is the very same failure as we would usually see in the doc test. Alright? So, and I'm going back to the slides now. Araf, can you please mute yourself? Because you're very, very loud right now in terms of background noise. Thanks. Alright, so we can run doc tests, we know when to apply them, and we can write them. And this is the most important stuff. This is essentially everything there is to doc tests, because they are simple, and you don't need to know more about those. So what's left now is, do you have any questions? And I also would love to get some feedback. I'm giving you a link in a few minutes. So far, any questions? No questions? Or is anybody muted and thinks he might not be muted?
So say I write a class and So how do I write the doc tests for the class or for the member functions mostly?
You can do both. Doc test will essentially be run for every documentation comment of everything. So you could also have a module doc test, or a class doc test, or a method doc test, right? Doc test will collect those all, and all those examples could be also standalone, right? You can also write doc tests in, for example, an restructured text document. So in Koala we have some doc tests within the actual documentation, right?
Do those get executed as well?
Those get executed as well, yes.
Cool.
So you want to see it?
Yeah, actually, I did that for the caching thing. So I just wanted to know which is the more appropriate one,
Okay.
having it in the class or class definition or in the function themselves.
So if you want to demonstrate, basically it goes, you know, the doc test must serve the documentation. In the class documentation comment, you will explain how the class can be used in general. While in every method, you might have examples how to use this particular method. So you can have both doc tests in both the class and the methods documentation.
Alright. Yeah, I guess the private methods would have their own doc tests at least because they won't be exposed to the public API or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Okay, then I'm giving you the workshop feedback form. One moment, doc testing in Python. So here you have a feedback forum. Please give me some feedback. And thank you all for attending. I hope you learned something from it. We're all still trying out this remote workshop thing. It feels quite interesting not having the participants in the same room. Be sure to advertise the next workshop, because Tushar will be doing the next workshop, and we will need lots of advertising for it. And then that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Silence because nobody can clap and everybody is muted.